Joining us now is the film's co-director and one of its main characters, Nick Loeb. Nick, thanks for joining us to talk about this. What is the gist of the movie?
So the movie essentially talks about the story of how Roe came to be and how it was decided, and how essentially Planned Parenthood and the media manipulated the courts and Norma McCorvey into the 1973 decision to legalize abortion.
So it's generally a look at something with a critical eye, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it came off more of sort of a conspiracy movie, and it really delves into, the Supreme Court. I think it's really interesting. I've been in Hollywood for over 20 years. I've never really seen a film take on any Supreme Court case from the inside and how the justices made their decisions, how they were influenced, how they communicated with each other, and how they decided. So I think it was really an interesting peek inside the Supreme Court, which obviously ties into everything that's going on right now.
Yeah, and what have you learned from the whole process?
Well, I thought it was, the thing a lot of people don't really know is that Roe v. Wade was actually heard twice. It was heard once in 1971 and again in 1972, and it seems that, history has sort of repeated itself with the use of media trying to influence the courts, and how we have today what we like to call fake news. A lot of that happened back then as well, trying to influence the courts. And, it's really interesting how Roe was decided, based upon a case really that had just happened a few years before that, Griswold v. Connecticut, which actually created this new right to privacy that is not even in our Constitution.
Right.
And the justices used that right of privacy to essentially pass Roe.
Yeah, let's listen to Judge Barrett. She was asked by Senator Amy Klobuchar yesterday if she considered Roe v. Wade what would be called a super precedent. She explained how she sees the case.
Scholarship and the way that I was using it in the article that you're reading from was to define cases that are so well settled that no political actors and no people seriously push for their overruling. And I'm answering a lot of questions about Roe, which I think indicates that Roe doesn't fall in that category. And scholars across the spectrum say that doesn't mean that Roe should be overruled. But descriptively, it does mean that it's not a case that everyone has accepted and doesn't call for its overruling.
Yeah, Nick, during this process, what have you learned to underscore her position that this is not a super precedent? Why do you think it's not?
Yeah, well, I completely agree. It's not a super precedent case for multiple reasons. I think even Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been quoted as saying she thinks it was, although she likes the outcome, she believes it was a wrong decision. I think one of the main issues, what Roe did, was it just didn't interpret an existing law and right to privacy. It went ahead and it did more and expanded and created actually law. So the three-trimester system that we all talk about today was created out of Roe. I mean, Roe created the 3 medical trimesters through a legal process that we talk about today through a woman's pregnancy. And of course, as we know, it's not the Supreme Court's job to create law. It's their job to interpret law. And I think that's one of the main issues, I think, that's challenging here. I think also the right to privacy. I mean, although the right to privacy was created with Griswold, it's not in our Constitution. And even with the right to privacy today, it's never an absolute right? It's always governed by other rights. I don't have the right to kill somebody in my own home and say it's the right to privacy, right? So you can say the right to privacy, but it's governed by other rights. So there's so many questions within how Roe was decided, and the outcome, it doesn't make it super precedent, and why cases that attack Roe can be heard again to maybe not necessarily overturn Roe, although that's a lot of us would like that, but to maybe make the law better.
Yeah, and it might not come down to one big, it might not be one big case that undoes it. It might be smaller ones per state. I couldn't agree with you more. When I studied constitutional law, I remember looking at it and saying, this is clearly legislating from the bench. The whole trimester thing that you talked about, that's created for the decision, it wasn't in the case. So, Nick, what do you hope comes out of this?
Well, I think Roe, in some fashion or another, that no one's going to rehear Roe, right? All the players are deceased, but you'll have other cases that'll come up that'll put teeth in Roe, like we had with Planned Parenthood v. Casey. And I think at the end of the day, I think what needs to happen is and also new technology needs to come into play. I mean, back then, the justices in 1971 and 72, didn't have the technology to know when a fetus became a life.
Sure.
When there was a human being there. And today, right, I think that's more defined. And we can, hear a heartbeat much earlier. So I think all of these things need to take into play and really put teeth into Roe and really define when life begins. When do we as Americans or human beings have constitutional rights? And I think that is the question that needs to be asked.
That is a great discussion, and one that everybody should have. And is it viability or is it conception? Because a lot of people, that discussion, as you're talking about technology, that trimester system, it comes closer and closer to that moment of conception. So I think.
Listen, as the justice said, she's an originalist, right? So if you really take the Constitution and from that perspective, we talk about life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. We don't talk about life at viability. Only life at viability has protection. It's any life, right? That's the strict interpretation of the Constitution. So I don't think viability should even have a play in the argument.
Nick, thank you so much for the conversation. I appreciate it, and I wish you great luck with the movie.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time today.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.